Welcome to the Mitchell Report Unleashed podcast. And I appreciate everyone that has watched every single podcast episode. Today, there's a magnitude of a conversation of where we're going to be talking about CSA. It's them type of conversations that's going to be gripping, bone chilling, but it provides a sense of clarity and opportunity for the audience members that any one of us could end up facing this. It's trigger warning that the subject matter is not for everyone. But I encourage every man, every woman, if you have kids, to sit down, watch this episode, and make the true inner connection on what overcoming adversity is and continuing to fight the good fight, to share the information to all your networks, to simply sit here and to create the awareness when it comes down to CSA. Let's get to the interview. Let's get to the podcast. I appreciate y'all. I believe today we have compelling conversations that are needed. And the more important thing about it is it's the conversations that inspire courage, change, impact, community, and telling a story. And I want all of the audience members that are watching or listening to really take in what's being said by my guest today. Welcome to the Mitchell Report Unleashed, Anneke, Lucas. How's it going?
Thank you. It's going all right. I'm not 100% because I've been sort of under the weather for a couple of weeks, but I'm all right.
No, I hear you with that. And I feel like I always say is we show up on the days sometimes that we don't really necessarily want to. It's like when you work out, the gym, yoga for yourself and things like that. And I feel like sometimes that makes the most compelling workouts and conversations.
Well, thank you.
You know, when we look at your journey, and I want to get into your story in a matter of moments, but I have the first question is, what was the most challenging part of your healing journey? And really, how did you overcome it?
Yes, it's a very good question. And so, yes, my whole life has been in this context of healing, and it continues, of course, but I do have now what I would say is a core of strong self-esteem that is operating as a compass in life, which before, when I didn't have that healing, life was just extremely difficult. I had an enormous guilt complex. It doesn't mean I was always feeling guilty. It was also sometimes doing behaviors when I'm actually not feeling the guilt when I should, and then otherwise feeling too much guilt. It was very difficult to go through life that way and then try to heal from something that, I had a really hard time finding support because there were therapists that wouldn't believe me. There, everyone's limited, but maybe because it is so extreme and I didn't want to believe it. So there were, I'd say, 20 years of my life that were extremely difficult when I was really getting into the feeling of the pain and the horror, the grief of everything that had happened, that I'd been through, that I was made to do, all the losses that I experienced when I was feeling all of that. It's just very difficult to get through the day. And I work with survivors now, and I understand this is a phase of the healing that we do need to get through. And now there's more support, but there's still not a lot of support for people like us in the world. There's a lot of, disbelief, and there's a lot of skepticism towards us. And of course, that does not really help us in the healing.
When you speak to the skepticism, is it because the ones that are skeptical about human trafficking, pedophilia, is because they don't have that sense of self within that heart to really be able to understand and flush all of that information out? Or is it just a sense of just ignorancy?
Well, I think because we just sort of reached to the darkest elements of humanity that, in history, things were hidden, and then once they came to light, now we speak hundreds of years later, we say that was awful. Colonization was awful. Slavery was awful. The Holocaust was awful. We go back and we say that this was awful, but in the moment, it is just difficult for people to accept that people haven't, you have to look inside yourself, and you have to accept that you have these dark impulses inside yourself in order, or at least not avoid them, in order to accept this, that look at this. And there's also a lot of pressure for people not to believe it. There's a lot of promotion for the belief that it's not real. And those are the people that are involved in this, that have power and money, use it to spread that message, really, to make us survivors that are speaking up look like we're not believable.
And that's from my point of view, when I hear about your story and I've watched the magnitude of podcasts, I would listen to view and I see the same responses that it was Patrick Bet David, and you were on another lady's podcast, and it's still the same. It's the facial features. The faces can't lie, and it's like there's a sense of emotion that comes up, because for me, when you have a heart and you think about when you were a child, and we're gonna get into your story, and you think about the things you've been through, it's something that can happen to any one of us, especially if you have a young child growing up, right? It's not no laughing matter. And I think it's where you have these, if it's global elites, or you have those folks that think it's okay, because I hear a lot of different women that I talk to, or you're in I like to say, the barbershop talks of women being in some compromising situations, because we have these monsters of men and women that tend to want to simply use their power to, how do I say this, wreak havoc, and have these people feel so low about themselves. You get what I mean?
Absolutely. And in fact, I think it's actually the other way around. I think that people need power in order to abuse it. In order to give themselves a false sense of self-esteem, and then you're caught in dynamics where you need to lift yourself up at the expense of others. And that's sort of what I've lived through. That is the ultimate, expression of that.
Let's get into the story, right? Let's get into the story. Walk us down the time everything happened the way it happened, and what were some points that stand out to you, and how do you reshape it for the audience and the ones that you're helping alongside this powerful journey that you're on?
Hey, wow. Yeah, so I was born in Belgium in 1963, and my mother is not well mentally. She was single when I was born, and there was abuse from the start with her. And when she got married, and then I think she and our family were targeted by pimps for this network that was really the Belgian network of elites then. These pimps infiltrated into our family. The woman started cleaning our house every week, and then just took me along on outings for a year. That resulted in around my 6th birthday being taken to an event. You could say it was in a castle. It was immediately extreme. The abuse was extreme. I was also immediately threatened not to say anything in an extremely graphic way. And then I tried to speak anyway to my mother. And then, this very strange thing happened, that my mother actually took over from this couple of pimps, and she started to drive me to events. So events would be, it could be an orgy, and often some of the depraved aristocrats would offer their castles for these events. The person in charge was a politician. It was a renowned politician. He was at the time Minister of National Defense, but he was also Prime Minister twice in Belgium. He was sort of running this network, but he was then beholden to the royalty, who were also involved, but much more in a way that was much more aloof. And the politician was really running it like a mafia, where children were being used to draw people in, and people are constantly being tested and triaged. So the pedophiles and the psychopaths were the ones that do well in this power abuse system and get rewarded with position. So it becomes a tight network. And this was happening through the Freemasons, but other clubs as well. Anytime there's secrecy involved, there seem to be people that were coming out of those, also religious organizations. So we had the children. I was then used in the beginning for people that were being indoctrinated, that were supposedly their first time with a young child. And then I had to make them feel comfortable, to rape me. That was my job. I was called a prostitute. I was called a whore all the time. So at that time, I was just being brought back home to my mother, who was taking money. Was also sometimes used in ways where I could have easily died, because certain aristocrats were extremely sadistic, and so they would be given children. And then it was just really just by accident. So yeah, these things are absolutely extreme. And then they're also used, this is the Belgian network now. So I was also taken to Holland. These are small countries. I was taken to Holland for child porn, but I was considered a child that was expendable in the beginning, because my mother, even though she was doing this, she was so eager. She was so excited about the status of these people, that these were VIPs, and she wanted so badly to belong to that group and brag about it to anybody that she met, that I think that her particular craziness was not well suited to the network, because she was just too enthusiastic. You could say she couldn't keep a secret about that very well. So she was just driving me, and she wasn't coming in. And so my family not being in the network, I was expendable. That is to say, there were doctors, there were lawyers. Had I not survived, there was a doctor that could write a death certificate. My mother could be the grieving mother. Everything was set up that way, that these things could happen in secret. There were ways, I'm sorry, but it was really nightmarish. And just as this worked as a mafia and a blackmail operation, they also used children then to connect with people that were higher up than them. So in 1972, the Bilderberg meeting happened in Belgium. I was 9, and then I was used for a ritual. And that's when I was then, David Rockefeller took an interest in me. He was there. This ritual was done in honor of him. He took an interest in me through very strange circumstances. I don't need to go into it. But then he was going to make me his slave. And that meant that he was going to have me trained with mind control training in Germany. After checking out, training me himself and checking out my talents, checking my lineage, which I did not know myself, but apparently they went and found out who my father was, my birth father was, and who, that blood was very important to them. And all of these things were being arranged, that I've been able to put back together in my adult life to set me up as I would have been a singer actress in France, and then spying for David Rockefeller, and with backed up by the Rothschilds, and then basically I would have been a very high-end prostitute, basically, but also spying on all these men that are already in this network, but at the same time everyone's spying on everyone because they're being held together through the pedophilia and the blackmail coming from that pedophilia. So that was the plan. I didn't go along and ended up being kicked out a year later. And I didn't go along because I didn't want to do what I had to do to be part of this club. It really is. You do have to give your free will, by the way. Even as a child, I was asked to give my will. And the first time when I was 9, I gladly gave my will because it sounded really good. What was being promised me sounded really good compared to what I'd lived through before. But after a year, when I was aware what this was about, I did not want the fame and the power. I had really wanted respect, but real respect, not flattery. And so I ended up getting very viciously reprogrammed, kicked out, and then reprogrammed to make sure I would never be successful. And then spent one more year in the network in Belgium, which is the subject of my book, is how I spent this last year in the network in Belgium and how this young perpetrator really came in, a young gangster came in, and then ended up a year later rescuing me from the network. And that's
Wow.
at age 11, a deal was made and I was let go, but not before having to do horrific things to make sure I would be very dissociated and or live with a tremendous guilt complex. And yeah, it wasn't, the idea was definitely not that I would be doing all right in adulthood and that I would ever heal and I would ever speak out, of course.
I hear everything you're saying, but when I hear, and I think what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make sense. I heard everything you said. I'm trying to make sense of it. But when you hear of the talents, like, that is sick,
Yeah.
and twisted,
Mm.
and then it's mixed with the mind programming.
Yeah,
Like,
mind control.
mind program, mind control. And I sit back and I say, we've all been young to simply sit here and to have your reprogramming. Like, I remember when I was getting up in 6 o'clock in the morning, it was morning breakfast, and my programming was watching sports to recap stats, right? And being on the basketball court at school by like 8:30. For you, it's kind of like that childhood, that young childhood, that young girl childhood is stripped away from you.
That's for sure. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, when you think of it now at your age, is there any parts when you talk about your healing that are mental blocks, or is everything like a vivid memory to you?
Well, these memories, they're not like any regular memory anyway. So everything comes first very fractured. It comes through sensations. Sometimes you never have visuals. I call it intuitive memory because it never lives in the same part of your brain as a regular memory. So when you're talking about you got up at 6, you watched basketball, you went to the court, you remember that in a certain way. Not any of these things I've remembered in that way. So it is really a work. The work is, first there's the when something comes to the surface, when your system decides that there's enough safety, that something can be revealed. Let's say when something begins to come to the surface, it may come through the body, through pain or sensations. It may come through a visual, a flash. Like I used to have flashbacks, for example. For 10 years, I had flashbacks before I believed that this could be true. There could be even a smell can be a trigger, and then there's several things that can happen, how this can be evoked. And then it's my own job is to start investigating, like, does this even make sense? In the beginning, of course, it made no sense at all. I had a story about what my life was with huge holes, but I had the story. So the work is then, well, I'm not going to just accept that this is real. Of course not. I don't know this. But then the process then goes into, well, then, but if this were true, then there's suddenly, often, then there's all these other things that start to make sense. Like behaviors of mine that I never really quite understood, maybe impulses or, and suddenly I say, oh, that would make sense then. So you start to read the symbolism of your own actions and of life and how you attract circumstances that really are an emotional repetition of the past, where you're given the opportunity to heal. Because you can also have an emotional repetition where you just end up in the same kind of whatever the cycle is. But hopefully you can get underneath the circumstances and you can go and find, you can get to the original trauma. But this work of what my life story was when I was a young adult, what I thought it was, and then compared to the reality, that's a very slow and painful process, because first I had to understand that my mother is not at all who I thought she was. And that, became through simply telling her about the abuse by the pimp. The husband of the cleaning lady had raped me, and I told her that. And she didn't respond. And a few weeks later, she was talking about him coming to her house, but like just in passing, like nothing had happened and she had heard nothing. And so I started to question her. That led then to slowly remembering things of her. And then once this link, I think, was made, like my mother is capable of anything. This very big shift of my mother is this wonderful person, the way she presents herself, the way she wants people to believe, how she wants people to believe what she is. This nice woman and always very sweet, that once that reality sinks in of who she really was, with the help of course, in the beginning, always with help of therapists who have the perspective that, you can see an action, and I would be talking about an action with the perspective that my mother is a good person and she would never mean to hurt me. And I'd need an adult perspective to say, well, that's really not nice at all what you're talking about. So that this child part gets this new adult perspective, this new parenting. And once I was clear about what my mother was capable of, it really started. And then the Dutroux case, which is connected to my history, broke loose in Belgium in 1996. And I had already had flashbacks for 9 years by then. And suddenly this case was just right there. It was written about as the ring in Belgium in the New York Times. So suddenly it was all there. And I then had to find a therapist really that could work with me, because for 9 years I've been working with therapists who couldn't go there. And then when I started to say, well, I think this might have really happened actually, because there's always a process going on. I was having flashbacks, and there were things that initially made no sense at all, but eventually, once I was sort of closer to understanding that my mother was capable of anything, there were also, I was also sometimes just brought to a man's house or a house, and there was one man there, and I would be kept out of school. There were many ways in which it wasn't just orgies, which were like they were orgies already, and then the children were kept on the side until everybody who wasn't ready for the children, was gone. But also sometimes it would just be trafficked to one person, and sometimes, it just depends. It was like a regular trafficking operation, you could say, but on a large scale.
I think what comes up for me is now, if you mind me asking, I know it's not right to ask a woman her age. How old are you now?
I'm 61. I'm going to be
61. Okay,
Yeah.
61. So let's go from the ages of 20, 30, 40, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let's start here with friendships. Was it hard to navigate friendships and how people would potentially perceive you?
Of course. So the mind control does this thing that when you're mind controlled to be a celebrity, you're supposed to be able to, or you're mind controlled in general. The children that are being trained for mind control, often children that are born in families that are part of this, and so the children get abused also because they're also being trained in that way, that you have a very normal, passable front. So you can, on the surface, everything looks normal. But when it comes to relationship, I wasn't normal at all because I was trained as a sex slave. So for the first years, I could only ever be comfortable alone with a man. And because of the abuse by my mother, and because of a female abuser who was extremely vicious, and because of some other things, my comfort was with men alone, because that's what I was trained to really hone in on and be comfortable with. So I was really comfortable at attracting men, especially when I could feel a certain type of attraction that they had for me. Then I could go a really long way with that, and staying in that zone with that person. That's how I felt comfortable. I didn't feel comfortable in groups. I didn't feel comfortable with other friends, etc. I had passing friendship, but it was always troubled because of the power dynamics, because of my extreme dissociation. I remember I went to film school. I was always writing, and thankfully it kind of got everything through the writing. So I was accepted at American Film Institute as a screenwriter. And even though I'd never gone to, I did not have a bachelor's degree or anything, but I was accepted there based on my work. That's what they did. So thank goodness. But there I was in school, for example, and a woman, a peer, of course, another student, set up a party for us girls, like a clothing exchange party. And as we were there, her male partner came in. And so what apparently happened is I lost time. I went into a part that I did not remember afterwards. And she was furious with me. But she was thankfully honest enough that she was furious, but also coming to speak to me so that she could tell me what I had done. And I was shocked. But apparently my sex slave had come out, and I had done something that was very upsetting to her. And I remember that when this man came in, I thought, no, because we'd been drinking and we were having a lot of fun. And when he came in, I was thinking, no. And then I must have gone in a different part. So it was very difficult to have relationships because with women, with my mother, and then this other woman who abused me so badly, was difficult because I was a little bit scared of women. And especially women who you could say are borderline. I would connect with borderline women who, like my mother, would be like a child, but like the eternal victim kind. And then I would sort of be like the little helper and trying to support them. And then, of course, I would end up feeling completely exploited. And then when you set a boundary, it would be hell to pay. So it was very difficult to navigate life, and I was always in trouble. I was always in some kind of an emotional repetition, often romantically, because that's how I'd been trained. But in my book, I write about that relationship with that gangster. He gave me very specific instructions by which to live,
Mm. Mm.
which I did. And that saved me from ever going into a repeat where it would be physical. So
Wow.
I was emotionally reliving everything, but I stayed away from drugs. I stayed away. I mean, the instructions were so specific that it wasn't that I didn't do drugs. He said, never buy them, never do anything to get them. If they're given to you, you can take them. Or never become a prostitute. Very important. That would have happened really early on. Never do anything, never sleep with anybody for anything. Very important instructions that it seems it was guided, when he said them. But I lived by those. And that really saved me from falling into what I had been reprogrammed, you could call it discard programming. So first I was programmed to be a celebrity. Then it turned out that even though they'd invested a lot, I wasn't the right fit, because I wasn't going to obey enough. So then eventually the reprogrammation was discard programming. I will kill myself or I'll end up on the streets, a junkie. This was programmed into me. But because of these instructions, that didn't happen. And even though I lived under that weight of that reprogrammation where I was so humiliated and so made to feel so bad, in the most grotesque way, by the way. I'm not going into details, but it was absolutely grotesque what was done. Medieval, you could say. It didn't quite, it was difficult to live my life with that sense of really low self-esteem and self-hatred and feeling that I am bad and I don't deserve anything, and that's very difficult financially. And yet, because of these instructions given by this gangster that included even a profile of whom I should marry.
Okay.
Yeah. Which again, it saved me. He said, marry someone, not an older man who made his own fortune, but find someone your age from a wealthy family, preferably a family of New York bankers, he said, which is, of course, he was thinking of Rockefeller. But I actually married that person, and because I was married to that person, I was financially secure, and I was, again, really able to focus on healing. And while I was married, I was not really dealing with my own insecurities regarding finances, but after that marriage ended, I had to then go and find that healing because I was so much made to feel that I didn't deserve anything that it was very difficult to make money. But I did have the privilege and the comfort, really, to be able to heal a lot and then continue doing that, really.
Mm-hmm. Speak to, because there's a lot there, and I feel like I'm getting called to speak to this, is where we all grow up and we all want to feel that love from that person. It doesn't matter if you want to date male, female, or if you want to be bisexual or be gay. It is what it is, whatever, different strokes for different folks. When you look at your life and even building those small patterns of like bringing someone in to love, to trust, what did that look like? And was there a lot of mental blocks that happened in that journey? And how did you really become one with self to really understand what love truly meant?
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's the subject of the book because it is called Quest for Love. And of course, as a child, I was looking for love. And then these attachments are formed. And I loved these people. I loved my perpetrators. And I loved my mother. And then coming out on the other end, I realized, well, my mother actually never loved me. And there was never any sign that there was any love there. But there was some deeper connection, even with perpetrators. But this quest for love, ultimately, I had an experience, a near-death experience in the network, right when I was being set free, because I was going to die. I died. I died in extreme circumstances, but I had this glorious experience where I was really exposed to the reality beyond the phenomenal world, the physical world being dualistic. I was really in that sphere of the unconditional love that flows from the divine, that is there for all of us, and that was temporarily in that experience for me lifted so that I could feel that, so that I would know what to seek in my healing, as one of the reasons why I had this experience. And what happens in the network is when people seek that experience, that high, that bliss, in even in something as gruesome as a ritual, it is the only way that people that are extremely isolated and you could say traumatized and not able to heal from their own traumas, so they need to keep putting it out on others and finding new victims and everything. In that moment of the worst things being done, there is a release created from all the parts that have been frustrated. Because when you're being abused, your fight instinct is suppressed and your flight instinct is suppressed. And it creates this, when you're being abused a lot, there's this buildup of extreme frustration. And of course, there's all the humiliations and everything and all of that. When you don't heal it, it never leaves you. It's still in you. And so the network creates these outlets for perpetrators to get temporary relief from this stuff that is still with them and that they can't let go of, except for passing it on to a new victim when they get to feel the freedom. It's the freedom of getting away with. And the states that are reached, and I was drugged a ton, I was drugged a ton, but the perpetrators were also extremely drugged. And so in times when you could say the worst possible things are happening, and you're doing everything to not even be present at all because it's so awful, but you're participating in that high that has sexual, drugged, there is a communion of sorts where people feel extremely high and in that moment together, because everyone's isolated in their own trauma, you could say, and it's not a real solid group. They're not real friends. Nobody's real friends in the network, but there is a togetherness in that moment that comes close, strangely enough, to the real thing, the bliss that is the real thing, which is more subtle, of course, and which is a lot harder to come by, because you have to go through, you have to look inside yourself and you have to face all your darkness. You have to face your own darkness, you have to face your shadows, which in the network you're being given so many shadows. You got to face those in order to go to the source of the psychological experience, that you can bring that love in and bring that light in. And so the healing is spiritual for me in that way, that you go to the experience, you shed light into that darkness, that most horrific of circumstances, of scenes, really, and thing that you went through. But as a child going through this, you're stuck with whatever lie it is, that you're not worthy of being loved, for example, I think is a very big one. So you're being abused, you don't feel worthy of being loved now, and that is something that's going to stay with you. It's a belief that stays with you, and you're gonna split and everything, you're gonna dissociate. So when mind control slaves are connecting with somebody, like if I was going to go, so I was deployed for the first year. I was 9 years old. I was being sent to Germany to spend time with the former chancellor there. That was Kurt Kiesinger was his name. And I spent time with, when I was with him, I was completely with him. I was exactly whom he wanted me to be. That he was a pedophile. He liked 9-year-old girls. And I really, he was nice. And I loved that he was nice. He believed that he was good. I just thought he was such a good man. And I was completely with him in that moment, like an actor, in the role. And then I would see Rockefeller sometime later, and he would ask me about his weakness. And I would just, another part of me was present when I was completely there with him. And then the reporter part would just come out and just start telling him about his weaknesses, another part. So connecting these different parts to yourself, that means you're going to now live this connection that I feel with this man and this intimacy. It's all false. Of course it's false. I'm a child. But in adult life, you can do the same thing. I could, as a young adult, very easily connect with a man, and it would feel very intense and intimate and everything like that, but it wasn't real. Because either he was disconnected or I was dissociated or whatever it was. It was never right because I wasn't connected to myself. So connecting to myself in relationships, I have worked through friendships and have real friendship and really practice intimacy and honesty and, being able to be vulnerable with, first, of course, with therapists and then with friends, with equals. And I have not been able to really do that in an intimate relationship. And I don't know if I need to, I don't think sexuality is cured, necessarily. You don't want to I don't want to put too much focus on sexuality because there's too much focus on it to begin with. So it's not maybe the most important thing. I don't think there's anything wrong in that level. That's not the problem, but it's more to really be intimate with someone and to be able to be vulnerable and honest when it's difficult and so forth. Yeah, I feel good inside myself, and I have intimate relationships, but I don't have a love relationship, a romantic relationship. And, clearly it's not meant to happen right now, but if it were ever meant to happen, to come my way, then I would certainly be open to it. But maybe it's not necessary. I don't know at this point.
Mm-hmm. And you're speaking a lot to, in my personal belief, true intimacy is able to sit and be in a room, be in a vehicle, be in a park with that said loved one, and you can connect on a level of understanding to where it's not all about the physicality. Physicality, I always say, is the bonus factor, but can you simply coexist in the same room when you're sitting at dinner in-house or going for a restaurant, taking your phones, keeping it in your purse or whatever, you know what I mean? And you can really connect to relate with that person. And it's like having those dopamine connections, because we live in the digital world where it's like, if you're talking to that said person and they message you, do you still get those butterflies? Do you still get those goosebumps that it is that you have? That's the true intimacy that I speak to. You get what I mean? Because I think that the way that the world is shaped right now is that it's too overglorified of what, a man and a woman are supposed to do and the way they're supposed to coexist with each other.
Oh,
And I
it's
think
all about
that's,
sex. The way that it's
there you
presented,
go.
it's all about sex. And romance is all about sex. And I really don't, I think it's so overglorified, really. And romance itself is a drug, one that is being sold a lot, because I think the ultimate love that we want is the divine love, frankly, and that we connect with people from that place that I'm a child of the divine, and I'm connecting with you. And so that means that there's always respect. It's like the first rule in every relationship. And when you break that, because we're all human and we're all flawed, that when you break that, is it then possible to repair it? Is it possible to say, I felt really bad that I did that to you. I'm sorry. And can we do that? Can we then use our flaws to actually go and look at ourselves and maybe grow?
Absolutely. Speak to this part here, because I feel like my audience is, it's all over. You have single parents, you have folks that are together, they have kids, single parents have kids, things like that. When they hear your story, is one. Two, they read your book. Three, how can they be able to help their kids understand the navigation journey in life, that this is out here at an all-time high, which is going to lead into my next question down there in a little bit. But how can they simply sit here and add these tools to help that young boy or that young girl as they're traveling, going to school, doing all these things, being at the magnitude of different, hanging out with friends and stuff like that? What are some tools that they can take to help coach their kids?
Well, I think it's very complex today to be a parent because there is so much that is coming even through the schools, and there is so much programming directed towards the children, also through the screens, of course. So it is very difficult for parents, I think, to really be parents. And so that's the first thing. But I think the most important thing that you can give to your child always would be that they know that they don't ever need to do anything that they don't fully 100% want, even if they know the person, even if they have a connection with that person. Anything that doesn't feel comfortable, just really teaching children that their body is their own at all times, I think is really important. And of course, there's a lot of grooming that's happening, to trick children in that. So that's where it's really complicated, I think, for the parents to really make sure that their children are safe from being groomed, and maybe even talk about that. I think ultimately the parents are the key, though, because I work with other survivors, and so you can call this organized abuse. Some people, it's satanic ritual abuse, mind control. So these are extreme traumatic things that happen to children that get trafficked at this young age. I don't know anybody, any survivor, where some way the parents were not responsible. It would be very rare that a child, let's say, gets kidnapped. Okay, then the parents may be, out on a limb. But in general, it's almost always the parent's sickness, the parent's mental illness gets targeted. You see, that's what happened in my family. So for the parents to be aware, I think that's the most important thing. You are the guard, the safeguard for your child, and that's your role also, to keep them, to protect them, to keep them safe. And it is more complex today, I think.
No, it's so true, because it's like, I feel like the screen time is one thing, and I think some parents like to put the screen in front of the child. Heck, I'm all for it. If you get your schoolwork done, you do your homework, and you're getting good grades, yes, you can play the PlayStation, the Xbox, and on the phone. It's good. But then it's like the overconsumption of that screen time, when it's like, you got to teach them the yin and yangs of having a phone, when to call that number,
Yeah,
if there's a case of an emergency. You get what I mean? And
absolutely.
it's like setting up those parameters, because I think that, again, we know about the social programming that's going on. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And a lot
You,
of these games, for example, children play these games online, they have chat rooms. So it's like pedophile heaven, because
yep.
they think they're talking to another child. And then that other child wants to meet them. That's how the grooming happens a lot. So we have to, again, there's a lot going on that we have to be careful, that we have to be aware of.
Yeah. And I feel like you have to sometimes, it's like, micromanage your children, because it's like, I know some folks that have, their kid playing the game and stuff like that, and they monitor everything. It's like they turn off certain things because you have to, especially when you're gaming. Like when you're gaming on Call of Duty or NBA and doing all this other stuff. I'm telling you, some of these kids will be cussing you out on the other end, and I'm like, wait, you're 12, little man. You're talking to someone that's a grown ass man. Like, how do you even know to say those words? But then it's like, when the parents are not with them, and
Exactly.
they're in the schoolyard, or they're gaming on, on the headset, you don't
Hmm.
know what those conversations are looking like, because little Timothy down the road could be simply sitting here, gets, and his live ends in a certain video game, and he starts cussing you out and knowing all these words, and you're like, what dictionary did you pick up yesterday? You know what I mean? And it's
Absolutely.
just and it's just like, I feel like there's you got to just have that time to where in life you have to say, look, enough is enough. Now it's time to put it down, pick up your book, and, start going back to the continuous learning. You know what I mean? Because all that stuff at the end of the day is all recreational activities. And I think that I'm not a parent myself, but I say to my audience is that 1% better effect. And it's stories like this that captivate, that may be tough to digest, but when you actually get through everything, you'll know that there's wholesome meaning and that there's yourself that is shining a light that's so bright to help any man, woman, child, parent, or a survivor that has been through these horrific events and things like that. Yeah. Let's get into this, because I feel like the media, right, in shaping what, child trafficking and all these different things, like, how do you feel like the media does in portraying that on a global standpoint?
Well, that's very interesting because I was trained for 1 year to become a singer. So from 9 to 10, 1972 to 1973, I was being trained, and it was all quite formal. First I was being triaged by Rockefeller himself, took me to his own homes. He was making me comfortable in the elite atmospheres. He was also taking me out, I was out with him. So he was basically, well, he was training me, but he was also seeing what he could do with me, how he was going to use me. And then he had to get permission from Rothschild. So we went to that home. And then I got a semi-formal invite into the family where I had to give my will. And I did. It sounded really good. I was being sexually abused, but I had never been treated so well in my life. So suddenly I went from being treated like absolute dirt to being flattered a lot and being told I was special. And he was looking at my gifts also. He was really good at determining what I was good at. So it was natural also for me. So these natural gifts were then being used so I come from a family of classical musicians. So I was going to be a pop singer. And I didn't know my father, who's from that family of classical musicians, but I was going to be a pop singer. And then I was going to be a child who was singing in a very sexy way. And I did a performance in the network where I was singing a French song, and I was it was very tightly choreographed, so that I would know exactly what to do for every line, and every line was given the double meaning towards sexuality to make it funny. So I was making a song that was a beautiful classic song, and I was basically perverting it and singing as a child. I didn't really know what it meant, but it was basically sexualizing every line. And then another song was actually, it was my entry into this cult. It's a cult. And this song was like, I'm everything before never happened and I'm starting anew. It was that song, that was the energy of it. Meanwhile, there's somebody dressed as Satan. It's a cult. It's a cult. But it was so well done, the mind control training. And what happened to me that year, it was like I couldn't recognize myself anymore, because the way that I was trained, it's based on torture, but they go so deep into your instinctual being and using so when you're being tortured, there's special gifts come out, because you're going into survival mode. So suddenly you can see better, you can hear it's like soldiers experience the same thing. So when you're in survival mode, what they do then is they capture the special, the gifts that are coming out of you because you're in survival mode. They capture those, and then they put that in a certain channel so that you're going to do that with it. And then when you're doing that, you're doing it completely dissociated, in a completely dissociated way. You're going to do one thing and you're going to do that from that energy with that color trigger, color or word or some kind of a trigger that makes you do it. And it's so well done. And so they can call it up. That's not why I'm a slave. It's mind control. They're controlling not only my body, but they're controlling my mind. And for them, that's like everything. There is nothing more. So you really need the spiritual to get out of it. But meanwhile, they were making me into what would have been a pop star. And it was so well done. I never got an acting lesson, but I got a training to be a star, meaning mentally to be a star. I got a training in, it was in the lower floors of a castle, underground, in a castle in France, where I was basically being flattered the whole time. And I was naked as a 9-year-old child, whereas these adults around me were acting like the doting entourage. And it was as if they were acting like they didn't see that I was naked. Because I had to get used to the idea that my body was an object of worship for the masses. So I had to be used to the idea to be naked, because I was going to be naked a lot in films and so forth. And strangely, it works. At first it was extremely shameful to be naked in front of these people, but they were so nice, and they're themselves mind control. We're in a completely non-organic space. We were in some basement. They're luxurious rooms, but they're in a basement, so there's nothing natural about any of this. But everybody's very nice. I'm getting massages. I'm just being told all the time how beautiful I am. They're doing my hair. They're even doing my makeup, because they want to make me look like the persona that I'm supposed to be, which is natural looking. So they do it with makeup, That was my, so I was being trained to be a narcissist, really. And yeah, I didn't need acting lessons. That was all going to come naturally. But I did get, also there, when I was there, I got trained to sing. So the person who was training me, this man was a composer, a known singer-composer of this type of songs that I was going to be singing. So sometimes he was at the piano, but sometimes he would have me sing. Then he would touch me sexually so that my voice would become breathy. And that's then how I had to sing, you see. So everything is focused on what they wanted to do, which was to basically make this whole world a pedophile world and have pedophilia be accepted. So if there's a little girl who's acting very seductive and who's doing all these things, I didn't even know what I was doing, but that was a choreography. So you have these little girls that are being sold as prostitutes, really sex slave, but they don't see a child in the child. So I didn't see it in myself either. I was just acting like, like you said, my childhood had been stolen completely. I didn't think that I was a child. I thought I was, at this point, because of the mind control being so invasive and so strong, I thought I was participating. I thought I wanted this. Yeah. So I see stars obviously created in mind control. And if they weren't created from when they were a child, what I saw happen there too is, like, one thing I was made to do, for example, when I was at the homes of David Rockefeller, he asked me to look at artwork on the walls and then talk about it. And he could tell that I have a good eye. And so it was very nice for me to be told that I have a good eye for art, and I'm just discovering this whole part of me that I never knew. But it was going to be used in a network like this. I was supposed to use my good eye and then use my status to attract young artists that would be very talented, and then introduce them into the network. Because then what happens? So let's say a 20-year-old artist comes into the network. Then what's going to happen? He's going to either follow along because they have power, they know everything about power, and anybody who wants power is vulnerable. Like, they will use it. And then if you do what they want, you get rewarded with more power, more position, more visibility. You can see that in the world of entertainment. The more visibility somebody has, the more I sit there wondering what's happened, what they've done. Because it is a psychopathic system where the people who do the worst things get rewarded the most. And there is sacrifice involved,
Facts.
Like, people have to literally kill. And usually it's someone, you have to kill someone that you love. So they pervert everything about your humanity and your heart so that you will be on their level of, their psychopathy. Like, nothing means anything anymore. And then everything becomes this. What I saw was that everybody was in some crazy repetition of, when an adult kills a child, I felt that this adult was killing this part in himself that died, that lost hope. A little child that somewhere along the line lost hope of receiving love. And then that person, he's going to externalize that by going through the process of having a lively child and then going to the process of killing that so that it is reflective of what is inside of himself.
You see it even on media, and I look at, like, you see Instagram is one of the biggest ones, and even in health and fitness, it's not really now much about wanting to lose the weight and live the life and feel good about yourself through self-care. A lot of it now, and I think that's the reason why people get turned off from health and fitness, is the over-sexualization about the outfits that we wear and how we style it up. And then the captions and doing all this, which is, again, another form of social programming to a slight degree. And then it turns into where the sick, sadistic way, and what I'm trying to say here is, feel comfortable wearing the clothes that it is you want to wear. But men, women, you can't perpetrate that ugly thing of where, oh, well, she's dressed a certain way, I can go say what it is I want to say and do what it is I want to do and not have any consequences for your actions. And I think that's where people need to simply sit here and look at and says, there's the over-sexualization is one. Then there's feeling good about yourself is two. Right. And then there's three, having enough decorum.
Right.
That allows you to simply sit here and realize that even though if you're at the gym, you can't just gawk and stare at somebody. Yeah. Right. Now, when you're out there, or you're in the nightclub, in the bar scene with the drugs and the drugs and the alcohol and all this, and you may see a woman that has a certain top on, that doesn't mean that you can go have your way with her.
Absolutely.
What we're trying to say here, ladies and gentlemen, is that the social program that's going on, you need to filter it through your lens and understand is, can I be the best man, best woman that I can be? And know to stand up for what it is I need to believe in, to double down, triple down on what it is you're talking about. Because I see it so many times and I hear about it so many times.
Yeah.
You can't walk away from sexual assault. You can't walk away from human trafficking. You can't walk away from pedophilia.
No,
right?
You can't walk away from pedophilia. I hope that is the last, the last frontier that we say, okay, that no. And when what you're saying there, one the biggest tool that those people who want the power and who are very busy keeping the power have is, and this is also known as the tool of the psychopath, is to cause division. And to cause division, to keep all of us distracted, fighting each other so that we won't look at what they are doing. And division between men and women is very big too. That is on purpose, because why do women need to objectify themselves so much and don't have enough self-esteem to just, or just cover up a little bit? And then on the other hand, it's also not completely not okay that somebody who does objectify themselves to go and act on it. That is also not okay. But the division, that is purposely pushed. So it's division between men and women. It's division between right and left, really strong. It's division on as any issue is presented as something that you are either on one side or you're on the other side. And I think that if we say, well, no, we're not going to be on sides anymore, we're going to look at what is real. And even as we're saying that, I see attempts now to throw everything into chaos now, that nobody can know what's real anymore. So that what I say is also going to appear like it couldn't be real. Because ultimately, you see, I did that interview with Patrick Bet-David. Well, I haven't had any other invites from that sort of level of podcasters. And I think there's a reason for that, like at some level, this message is just not very convenient. If you really want to belong to the power structure and you really want that fame, that goes against what I talk about.
You just I didn't think you were gonna say it, and you know what? That is why I'll say this. His podcast and what he talks about, it's like, cause I sent, so there's people that are close to me, I sent that episode to, and they all were like, wow. I said, yeah. I said, that's what it's about. This is about the conversations that we're here to have. And what I like about his style, not to take away from our conversation, he knows how to talk, he knows how to interview, and he's not up against the fame, the fortune, the this, the that. It's about creating compelling conversation. And you know what? Maybe the higher ups are going to simply sit here and they're going to look and shy away from that. But the thing is, if you shy away from things like that, then you're a part of the problem. And it's the ones that I know that will listen to this episode, watch this episode. And if they watch it and they stop, maybe it's because a lot of what it is, it's inside. It reflects inside. Doesn't mean that you're acceptance to it, but it's hard to palate. And if it's hard to palate, that means that you're human. And if it's hard to palate because you're human, then you're okay. Then you pick it back up again. Right. And when you pick it back up again, you filter through and you make sense of what it is.
Absolutely.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
and I think that,
it takes courage. It takes courage to listen to this. I understand.
It takes courage. It takes courage. It takes understanding. And the thing is that they've always said this, if you don't stand for anything in life, well, then what the hell do you stand for? Because the thing is, I know any man, woman, or child that listen to your story. Like I said, is once this is done, like I'm telling people, I'm getting that book. I'm an audiobook guy, right? So hopefully it's on audiobook, but I'm going to support you even more and I'm going to buy the physical book. Because you know what? It's conversations like this that matter. It's conversations like this that help shift the ecosystem, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't truly believe the pendulum is swinging back to vulnerability in conversations, right? And that started at the beginning of last year with one particular interview. And, not take away from this conversation, Shannon Sharp, Cat Williams, and he said, listen, we're going to start seeing some of these vulnerable conversations that are going to happen in this ecosystem because it's what we need. It's what we need to simply get the earth goes round. We don't care to hear about the tomfoolery and the fluff. I'm over the fluff. Let's peel layers back and let's really get down to it and start digesting. Absolutely. Because if we could have done this in studio, my God, we would have done this in studio. Because I feel the energy, right? I feel the energy. And that's the reason why it's like, whatever your mission statement when you first began when you first came into this world was, it changed in the way that it needed to change. And it changed into the way to spread that awareness, because I know that the men, the women, and the child that appreciate your message, they're the ones that are simply sitting here saying, she's doing God's work. This is God's work, what we're doing.
Thank you. Yes, I do feel that obviously from an ego perspective, I would have never wanted this. It is not easy, but I do feel that the opportunities that I've been given to heal, that, I was in the network 5.5 years. That's relatively short. The people that I work with, they were often born in it. Some don't even know if they've really fully left.
Shit.
It's difficult to leave. And I feel that I was given these experiences for my own spiritual growth, to learn to love more, to learn to be able to understand everybody, no matter what they do, on a personal spiritual level. But as far as the mission, I feel very much in alignment now with, indeed, yes, to speak about it. And I shy away from speaking about this in a way that would be too brusque, because it is so grotesque, really, what they do. What I've been through is just nightmarish, horrendous, the worst horror movie that you would not even be able to put on a screen. That's what I lived through. And yes, to be able to speak about it in a way that hopefully it is someone who has some openness to the reality, to who has a heart, you said earlier, right? Who has a heart, and who is in their heart, and who is connected to truth, is gonna hear it, hopefully.
It's gonna resonate for sure. And I feel like my question to you is, on this mission that you're on, has there been any form of censorship
Oh yeah,
towards you?
tremendous. Yeah. Well, you'll notice that, the Patrick Bet-David interview is really unique. As I said, I'm not being invited on those other, the network operates this way. They allow, when truth comes out, well, it has to come out. So they can't prevent the truth from coming out, but they try to control it. So there's been many attempts. In the beginning, it was just to make me look unbelievable, from bots, a lot of bots coming in and just, saying anything really crazy, crazy liar, blah, blah, blah. And then personally, I've been threatened also. That has happened too. Like, I've been infiltrated, but I would be infiltrated by people that were trained like me. So even though they could still come to get to my weak spot, because they go to your blind spot, what it is that you need, and they find and really good at finding it. And I was trained that way. And then I had people coming in my life, and I was letting them in because they were going into my blind spots, but I could still sort of on another level see that they were doing what I was doing. So I learned, but I did get threatened with my life also. And but not too bad. The censorship, it's clear that with what I put out, and I'm a writer. I consider myself a writer first. So there's no reason, this idea that you do well and then, people find you, and that I have a feeling that it would be a lot more widespread if there was no censorship. It's been slow going. I started in 2013 to speak publicly. And I didn't even go with this idea that this is a big mission or anything. It just happened. But then once the cat was out of the bag, I continued. And I am very focused on healing. And so I teach courses. I developed a healing modality. And that's really the second part of my mission that I'm even more excited about, which is something for everybody to look at the way we project power up or down as a lens into our unresolved trauma. So that is something that I have to offer to the world. I'm doing level courses with that. I've been teaching that for 10 years. And that, that keeps growing, and that'll be my next book. But so that is the second part. Like, yes, I don't want to just say, here's this horrible, horrible, horrible thing. And there's no pat solution. The solution is awareness. And with the awareness comes the saying no to certain things, and because a lot of it is like we want to indoctrinate us so much so that we won't even be aware that how things are pedophilic everywhere and how our children are being accessed. So we need to be aware first, and once we have awareness, we can say no and we can take action. So I think that's that's what I'm doing. I'm spreading awareness so that people will have the awareness and have the choice. And I'm just one of many. And then I have also this healing modality, which I think is, a solution.
Yeah. I think one of my last questions is about systemic changes.
Yeah.
Right? What do you feel is the first systemic change to combat this whole child trafficking, human trafficking, and pedophilia?
I don't really know. It's a big question. I know my own role, I guess. I do think that all change comes from awareness. And so it does seem to be a time where there is a lot more openness to everything, to what is true. And I feel, because I see that people respond differently to me, over the years, how people respond. I feel that the need for deeper truth is so great now that we are just about there, that there is so much, I see so much from those who want to control us, how, the controlled opposition and all of that. I can just see so much behind so many of these things that are coming at us, whether it's partially truth, but then the context is weird, and what is the ultimate message? Does that have to do with truth, or does that have to do with swaying something? And everything is so manipulated. I feel that people are so much in need now of deeper truth, and this is it. I mean, when you've hit on this truth, then I think, hard as it is, and the courage that it takes to actually face it, I think it explains a lot. I think it simply explains, for example, if you think that our leaders, or those who present as authority figures, are not only greedy and corrupt, but they're doing that. They are themselves slaves in a system that is satanic, that is really against humanity. They really do not care at all about us. We are just cattle, and we are just being, if we realize that, there's a reason why things are not getting better. As consciousness is rising, and as people are more seeking to have peace, why is there more and more talk of war now? Why? That we don't want that. I don't think people want war. I don't think people want division anymore. And so I feel there's a lot more attempts to keep us in the division, but it's not working. So again, awareness. Once the awareness is done, once we understand that this is what's going on, then I think the awareness itself, it's a tide, like how many percentage, like the percentage of people that are really aware of this has, I think, grown exponentially. And it's a certain percentage or something, when a certain percentage of the population is aware that this is happening, then things need to shift, because it just cannot keep going the way that it's going now.
Well said. Well said. And I've always said is that if you are going to look at someone and hear what the media per se scrutinizes, do the deep dive and do the research, And I think that's one of the things with the names that you spoke about. It's do the deep dive, do the research, get on the Googles. Don't use AI, don't use the Chat GPTs, but use the Googles and really start researching, because you'll be very surprised, to my audience listeners, to your audience listeners, of what is true, what's fake.
Yeah.
Right?
And ultimately, you only have your own intuition to know what is true and what is false.
Exactly. Before we get out of here, I want you to plug all your information about your book, first and foremost, where everyone can get it. If they're inclined to do so, I encourage them to, right? And, social media, and what else you got coming up for the rest of 2025 and beyond.
Oh, thank you. Yes, so my book is called A Quest for Love, Memoir of a Child Sex Slave. That's the English version. It's just come out it's coming out in other languages now, but it's on Amazon in Canada, I think. So I think you can just purchase it on Amazon. But if you go to my website, which is annekelucas.com, just like one word, Anneke Lucas, you're going to find everything there. You're going to find my book. You're going to find the courses that I offer, which is what I'm doing a lot now. I'm teaching a lot of courses. I work privately with survivors as well. So I give, sessions, healing sessions as from my experience. So that is mostly what I spend my time doing. So the unconditional model is very important to me. So these workshops, if anybody's interested, I do live workshops, but I also do these online courses that are usually 10-week courses, and they're level courses. So this is a lot especially for providers also, for providers to be able to work with people with extreme trauma, just as I've experienced, and B, also to power dynamics are so subtle, and when you've been so horribly abused, well, we're very sensitive to power dynamics. So a lot of providers unconsciously are attached to their status, or attached to people needing them, or something like that. So it's really going into yourself first and looking at the ways in which you may be attached to power, and the way you project power up and down, and then really using that to heal yourself first, in this context of really changing this toxic power structure, so that we can create the egalitarian structure that we really, what is. When we look at these people, something that I haven't said, and my website is where you can find everything, and my social media and everything is on there. But as we've seen, that everything of this network goes into creating a facade. And so we're being given, in so many ways, we're being given a facade, which are lies. It has nothing to do. So a lot of the people that are propped up in front of us, we just don't know who they are at all. And we may be seeing a part that in that moment, like I was explaining, is completely believing everything that it says, but then next is doing horrible things, and, wouldn't even know one from the other in the same person, So, why am I saying that? To get beneath the facade, like we have this toxic power structure that is really led by people who are, when it comes down to it, completely infantile. There is no heart, like you said, there's no emotional awareness, there's no emotional growth that has happened with a psychopath from infancy. With most people, they're stuck at 2, 3, 4, 5 years old when they're in that network, so they're really operating from an emotional place that is extremely immature. And when we have the emotional maturity and the awareness, then you would never let somebody who is emotionally immature lead you. And I think that's what we're shifting.
Well said. Well said. I appreciate you. Continue to shine that light on everything that you're doing, everyone that you help. And more importantly, I know that the universe is one thing and God's the next thing. And God puts us on a certain path in the journey. I know that for a fact. If my grandfather was still here, he'd say the exact same thing. I close it out like this, where one of the things I've heard him say to my mother, and my mother told me this, is there's two things in life, ladies and gentlemen. There's possession and position.
Wow. Cool.
Never let one of them or both make you lose your common touch. What that basically saying is your sense of self.
Absolutely. That is so great.
You know what I mean? It's
That's the trap. That's the
yeah,
traps, possession and position. And that's exactly what we're talking about here.
absolutely.
Beautiful. Wow.
Yeah.
What wisdom coming down from
Wisdom,
your
great
life.
wisdom. If he was here, he'd be on the podcast already. Trust me. Because I know he looks at his grandson right now, looking down at him, and he's probably like, "You're doing some great work."
Well done, my son.
Yeah. So I appreciate you.
It's very nice to meet you, Rory. Thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing and for exposing this.
Yeah. Thank you.